All right, everyone. Thanks for attending the talk. I hope everyone's been having a blast so far. Please do have a couple of beers on me, and let's address some topics on hop aroma today. Now, I know it's weird, the yeast guy talking about hops, but I promise you there's a hidden agenda for me at the end of it, which you'll see. So, anyway, let's get into it. So, hops, why are they important? And oh, it needs to just respond. Hang on. There we go. So, why do I care about hop flavor? And indeed, why should you care about hop aroma and flavor in your beers? Now, we know that the main contributing component for hops in beer is the hop oil itself. That's, generally if you're going to be adding certain types of hops like Citra and Mosaic, for example, you're going to be expecting to get all those fruity, complex flavors, which should be direct carryovers from the hops themselves when you open the bags and smell them. But there is a water-soluble component too that the yeast is involved with and works on to boost aroma even more and generally leads to your more intense, hoppy, fruity, flavorful beers. And these are the things where you get to play with when you are creating your IPA, even just a general ale. It becomes a very nice canvas to work with in your beers and what ingredients to select to bring out certain types of characteristics. So, in short, this happens through a process called biotransformation. Now, I've put on some figures over here to try and explain the biochemistry, but you don't actually need to know any of this off by heart. It's important for you to understand what's going on. So it looks a hell of a lot more complicated what it actually is, but it basically boils down to the term biotransformation is just a fancy word for two classes of enzymatic reactions, for which one is a beta-glucosidase and the other one is a beta-lyase. They work on two different types of substrates. So the one works with a glycoside that releases a terpene and a glucose molecule, and the other one, which we termed a precursor, the biochemists got a little bit lazy with naming these types of compounds, that end up just releasing a thiol and an amino acid. So they're both doing the same thing. They're just working on two different substrates and releasing two different products. So to make it a little bit easier to digest, I decided to put it into analog form, where all you have to do is remember the shape, and you don't have to worry about this lovely complex biochemical structures over here. So beta-glucosidase works on a compound that looks like this. So you have your terpene that is bound to a glucose molecule that gets released into its aromatic form. So you cannot perceive a bound terpene, which is why I've got it here in brackets, that it's non-aromatic. And then as soon as it's released, it becomes aromatic. And you'll notice that there's a glucose molecule here, and obviously this is fermentation we are speaking about. So this is where it will get fermented out by the yeast, and sometimes it's the source of hop creep, where you will have a little bit more attenuation occurring in your beer after you've dry hop, for example, or even you might get some H2S or diacetyl because your yeast is trying to wake up again from the extra presence of glucose, and there's not enough nitrogen to carry that forward. So I will always find a way to work this into a presentation. It is imperative to have your nutritional sources for your yeast there, especially if you're going to be doing things like this, as well as introducing oxygen in later steps. But this is the gist of what's going on for beta-glucosidase with respect to terpenes. Now, everybody knows about thiols, which is what we're going to talk about next. That's the most spoken about topic. But I feel like terpenes have fallen a bit to the wayside and need to get a bit more attention again, which is why I've decided to talk about them first, because this is what I grew up with in my background in fermentation science. So thiols work in pretty much exactly the same way, except it's just the two different, the different substrate and products that are formed. It's just a different enzyme name, given the fact that it's working on different products, because we're lazy as scientists and that's all we name enzymes for. It's just a different shape, which is represented by this little doohickey here for the thiol and an amino acid. And then they get split. Same rules, they're non-aromatic when they're bound. and then they become aromatic in their free form. And again, the amino acid will get consumed in fermentation. Now, the important thing to note here is that the difference in concentrations between terpenes and thiols with hops. So terpenes generally tend to be in a lot higher concentration, whereas thiols tend to be a little bit less. And I suspect that's why they've gotten a bit more attention recently, because it's a whole new world when it comes to unlocking those thiols. And they all contribute towards flavor and aroma. So you can't just think about thiols. You do need to think about your terpenes as well as your other fermentative flavors. But really, that's all biotransformation is. It's just taking a bound compound that you cannot smell and then releasing it so that it can be rendered active. So, the contribution that you can expect from terpenes and thiols, will generally be fruity, because that's what we know and that's what we select for. But it's more about like the type of fruits. So terpenes will generally be like more citrusy, generally also quite floral. And this is where I tend to lean in for terpenes. I love Turkish Delight, rose petal, flowery type of aromas. So I'm sure a few of you are sitting there smiling at the moment, because I always talk about Windsor for that characteristics, and just general hop intensity is associated with terpenes. The thiols, however, are your more tropical fruits, blackcurrant, peach. So they can be subtle, but they can also be described as quite skunky, depending on the hop that you get. And that's another thing I want to drive. It doesn't help using hops that don't have a lot of these precursors of glycosides or thiol precursors in them, and expecting the world to change by using an IPA strain if there's nothing for that enzyme to work on. And that's something that you need to bear in mind. So choose your hops carefully, choose your yeast carefully, depending on what you want to unlock. So, of course, where does this come in from my perspective? From yeast. Why would yeast even begin to do this? Because we all know that yeasts are there actually for one thing, evolutionarily speaking, is to produce ethanol, to exclude other organisms in the environment so that they might persist. That's 90% of the time what evolution is doing for them. But eventually, they got so good at doing what they needed to do that down to the strain level, it's not even a special or animal kingdom problem anymore. It's now how each strain decides to survive. They need to differentiate themselves by some sort of selection, which is what evolution is at the end of the day. And there was a study done in wine where they mapped the sensorial perception of fruit flies and where they were attracted to for different wines. And they found out that certain flies had certain preferences for different terpene expressions and thiolistic expressions, which would cause the fly to land in the wine and carry the yeast over from their feet to the next bit of grape juice that was lying somewhere. And that's how they managed to perpetuate themselves. At least this is the hypothesis. It's obviously not really proven, but it makes sense on how this would happen, because it happened with us. We accidentally noticed these aromas, and we would then persistently select for them, not only for the aromatic stuff, but also for other standard parameters in terms of how they would ferment in terms of time, how temperatures they were, all of those things. But this is one of the contributing factors. So it's not so hard to say, well, if it happened to us, maybe that's how it originally happened with the fruit flies. So it really begs the question, who selected who? Did we select the yeast, or did the yeast select us? And, at the end of the day, does it really matter? Because we end up with our lovely hoppy, fruity and floral beers. And you really, really get to enjoy them and play with them. So take your IPAs and tweak them up with your different hops. Try and do a little bit of research of what different compounds are in there. I'm sure if you reach out to your hop suppliers like Yakima Chief, for example, or Charles Farham. I met the guys at Charles Farham over the boot camp, and I told them, like, guys, you need to put these compounds down there so that people like me can work with you guys and talk to the beer producers about how to get the most out of their beer. From my portfolio, these are basically all our different strains that we have. Not all of them, but most of them that have a lot of biotransformation, except for Diamond, I would say, or London. You have to throw in something to show a bit of contrast. And straight away, I'm just going to go and talk about the IPA strains because those are the most exciting from the hop perspective. So everybody knows and loves Verdant because it has a very, very high beta lyase activity, as well as some sort of beta glucosidase activity. Now its brother, which is New England, one of my favorites, has a completely different spectrum, almost no beta lyase activity versus its terpenes. So what this bears to mind is when you're making your IPAs, select hops that are going to work well with New England. So go for those floral hops that have lots of terpenes in them, or citrus invoked hops, things that you want a bit more subtle, like your peach or your blackcurrant. Then maybe you need to consider Verdant. But you could also consider Nottingham. But then you're going to lose out on a lot of the terpene actions and get thiols. So this is traditionally why Nottingham was regarded as an extremely neutral yeast, because the hops that everybody were excited for in those days, we weren't focusing on thiols. And you can see that compared to New England, for example, it has almost no terpene expression, which is why BRY 97 became the go-to West Coast strain, because it has almost equal or just generally good expression of beta glucosidase and beta lyase. But if we go to something like Diamond, no wonder it's a lager strain. It's incredibly neutral. Same as London, for example. Colne is quite interesting as a cold strain. It's got a high bunch of beta glucosidase, but the other cold strains that are out there, tend to be more lyase focused. So a lot of recipes are built around them. So you've got to keep everything in mind when you are choosing your strain. At least we have done the effort to tell you what these strains are doing. So if you can get a hold of some sort of information from your hop suppliers, then you can really, really pair up quite nicely what's going on. But also don't be afraid to try things. I mean, there might be compounds in a thiolistic hop that just has terpenes in it that weren't woken up by a terpene expressive yeast before. You got to know your yeast very, very well, almost like they're your friends, or as what I like to say, your children or pets. You develop a personality for every strain, and you've got to understand the quirks and the behavioral characteristics of those strains. And sometimes don't force the thing to play out of its comfort zone. They are really don't like being out of their comfort zones, and you just got to use the yeast to its strengths. So there's an extra tool as well, is something that's available for brewers to use. It's called Aromazyme. So this is a extracted or isolated beta glucosidase that we've developed. So Lallemand Group is very well known for doing this in the wine space, for example, where we have pectinases that get isolated for the wine industry to increase yields, and side activities of those are then beta glucosidase and beta lyase activities. But this is now a main beta glucosidase activity, the enzyme. It's not pectin, or it shouldn't be pectin active as high as what the other ones are. So I don't recommend using this to, render more juice out of your fruits if you expect to use some fruit in your mash, because it should be quite a low amount. I wouldn't use this in wine for that characteristic at all. This is supposed to be just focused on your terpene forward hops. It's an exogenous enzyme. So that's perhaps something I forgot to mention, is that you either get an enzyme that is internal within the cell or it's external. So if it's external, it means that your yeast is physically excreting the hop into the environment. The hop is excreting the enzyme into the environment to work on the hop. This, you can find in our distributor stores. So it's quite easy to get a hold of. It's a dry product, so you don't have to worry about shelf life particularly. But because it's dry, you just have to avoid moisture. So if you keep it in the fridge, sealed, it should be fine. There is some extra material that you guys can go and view. There's our Crowdcast portal for the Aromazyme. We do have our best practices information on biotransformation, which is basically what I've spoken about today, but a lot more in depth if you want to go and view that information. The IPA solutions is also an excellent way to get your head around this, because this is where biotransformation mainly occurs. And yeah, I encourage you to go check it out. If you can't find it, just reach out to me and I'm happy to send it to you. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to take the opportunity to also say now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that I have moved on to the distilling space. So I would be remiss if I didn't put Kofi's contact here in the event that you can't get a hold of me. And I'm always more than willing to help. I'm never truly leaving. My focus has just shifted onto distilling for the time being. And I'll always have a special place in my heart for you guys as brewers. So I really don't mind if you guys reach out to me over a private WhatsApp or an email if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to answer. And thanks for listening. If there's any questions, we can take them. I'm not sure if Troy's going to just pass around the mic.
Yeah, sure. Any questions? Right. Okay, just speak up.
All right. Hi, Jacques. How are you doing?
All right, and you?
Good, good.
Is that stud cut over there?
Can you see on the money? I just had a quick question on the enzyme activity. Was that temperature related?
To be honest, I don't know. I would have to go and check for you, but I would assume that they would keep the temperatures at a standard to measure the relative enzyme activity.
Okay, perfect.
But I can go and find the original report for you if you're interested. I'll just ask the R&D team. Perfect. I can't tell you what temperature it's at, for example, but you know, just taking a guess of how they would have conducted the studies, they would have done it under standard Lallemand brewing conditions. So 20 degrees Celsius at standard 12-degree Plato, for example.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Yeah, we've got one in the back there.
Hi, Jacques. So what's the stability of these enzymes? So how long will they be active after you've added them to the wort? Because it's a low pH environment. Normally these glucosidases work a little bit higher. So what's the shelf? How long will they be active?
So the nice thing about it being in the yeast is that the yeast would be, we hope that the yeast is continuously producing them through its fermentation activity. We've seen it in wine like that. So that's why it's important to select your yeast. But I assume your question is more closely related to the Aromazyme. Yeah. We recommend adding the Aromazyme whenever you're going to be doing something to do with hops. So please don't add it at the beginning of the fermentation, thinking it's going to do wonders for your dry hopping at the end. Well, I would recommend you add it when you're going to be doing your dry hopping regime. To answer your question specifically of the stability of the enzymes, we haven't really measured that. We know that enzymes in general will have a half-life from standard biochemistry. So just following that knowledge, it doesn't make sense to trust in it to work in the long term. Just add it right at the beginning, unless you have a yeast that is actually producing it like New England or Verdun, for example. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. I can always ask the R&D team for you.
No, it's fine. You can send me a sample and I'll test it myself.
You want a sample? It's cheaper than my yeast, so I think you can get it.
Cool. Let's take one more question.
Hi, Jacques.
Hey, that's Nicole, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I didn't see Nova on your list there.
Yes, so it's because this is an older best practices. We haven't updated that profile yet. So Nova is more terpene forward than thiol forward, which makes sense because it's a lager strain that was hybridized with an ale strain that has a very good H2S metabolism. It doesn't have a lot of thiol expression. It's mainly terpenes is what I've seen.
What would it be closest to in terms of the existing ones there?
Colm.
Cool. Jacques, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. I just do want to say, I know you're moving on to the distilling part, but like we're in the industry, you can't really leave. We're going to bother you. We're going to bug you. To come and drink some beers with us. So, ladies and gentlemen, round of applause, please.
Yes, no, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And everyone, good luck. I'm looking forward to the results. I expect that there is very, very good beer on the table today. So that's the whole times for everyone.